Hello, good morning, everyone. I would like to thank AOS and Dr. Indrani for making me part of this wonderful instruction course. I'll be talking about posterior capsular rent and anterior vitrectomy from the anterior segment surgeon's perspective. I don't have any financial interest to disclose. So every cataract surgeon wants their surgery to be perfect, and they want to give good outcomes where they can have a good chop and with IOL implantation in the bag, and the surgery is done within less than 10 minutes. But all the cataract surgeon face a situation where the posterior capsule is ruptured inadvertently, and we all have to know how to manage such cases. So looking at the literature, PCR rates have been documented to be as low as 0.2% to 14%. So there is a quite variation because it's dependent on various factors, including surgeon-related and patients, eye-related and other factors. Vitreous loss also has been reported in the range of 1 to 5% in PCR rates. So there are various predisposing factors which leads to PCR intraoperatively. So there are the important ones are pre-existing small pupil or intraoperative miosis, very shallow or very deep anterior chamber, a certain type of cataract like posterior polar cataract where pre-existing posterior capsular weakness is present, or a pseudo exfoliation where patients have weak zonules. If an inexperienced surgeon is operating without proper supervision, then those also they can also end up having a posterior capsular rupture. Rhexis related issues like small rhexis or a rhexis radial tear, especially in intimus and white cataracts, are other factors which can lead to PCR. So PCR can happen at any step of the cataract surgery. I'll be talking more about a case of hard cataract where PCR happens during lens manipulation, a case of where the surge happened in a case of iris hoop during last piece removal, and a case of posterior polar cataract which was operated by a young surgeon. So this is the case of where the surge happened after expiration of the last piece, and we all know that when there is a sudden breakage of occlusion, there is a sudden gush of fluid into the phacoprobe, which causes the shallowing of the anterior chamber, and the PC moves forward and get caught into the phacoprobe, as you can see in the video, and it gets ruptured. So this is another case where it is a very hard cataract. So during lens manipulation, the PCR actually happened, but the surgeon is very experienced. He tries to handle this case meticulously for the remaining half of the nucleus. After chopping this hard nucleus, the one piece is kept above the iris plane, and the other nucleus is emulsified carefully. And after following which the remaining piece is also emulsified. But as you can see at the end of the procedure, there is a large central defect in the posterior capsule. This is another case of the posterior polar cataract where a novice surgeon attempts for the first time, and there are certain things to follow, like no hydro dissection, only hydro delineation, which has been followed. But important thing is very gentle epinucleus and cortex removal, where you need to remove the epinucleus from the periphery first and the central plaque at the later time. But in this case, the surgeon becomes a little aggressive with the removal of epinucleus, as you can see in this video. And during that, when the removal of the central plaque happens, the PC gives away, and because of that, there will be an opening in the central opening in the posterior capsule. Now there is a PCR has happened, as encircled by this. Important thing is not to panic in such situation. First, identify that there is a PC rent. So you have to inject OVD before coming out, before stopping your fluid. So for important things these are the rules you need to remember, that whenever there is a PCR, first of all, don't panic, don't just remove your probe suddenly. You need to inject OVD before removing any form of irrigation source. Then think and assess at what stage you have the PCR has occurred. Obviously have anterior vitrectomy available in the OT, and according to the capsular support, decide whether to put an IOL or not. So if PCR happens in the early stage of the cataract surgery where large nuclear fragment is still remaining, you may have to convert the case into SICS or ECC according to your comfort zone. If the small nuclear fragment is remaining, then it can be brought manually into anterior chamber and can be removed from the main port. Another IOL scaffold technique where IOL is inserted into the sulcus followed by phacoemulsification above the IOL plane also can be done in such cases. If the PCR happens during cortex removal, then dry aspiration of the remaining cortex or cortex removal using vitrectomy cutter using higher cut mode can be done. So for all anterior segment surgeons, it is important to know basics about automated anterior vitrectomy. Foremost, you need to have a tight and no leaky incisions. If at all any leaky incisions, you need to suture them and have a closed chamber. Keep the aspiration flow at minimum, vacuum adequate, and cut at maximum according to the machine availability. Have separate infusion and aspirations. For all anterior segment surgeons, the cut IA mode is more important because we want to just cut the vitreous and not pull it. Posterior segment surgeons use IA cut mode for the PVD and other maneuvers for the vitrectomy. You can use triamcinolone acetonide to stain the vitreous, and it will help for the better visualization of the vitreous. You can also insert pilocarpine for constriction of the pupil, which will prevent further upthrust of the vitreous, and also can, when in a constricted pupil, you can see pupillary peaking, which can also help with the identification of the vitreous. So automated anterior vitrectomy is done generally from the limbal approach and Pascaline approach. I'll be talking about limbal approach, which is generally preferred by all anterior segment surgeons. So this is the case where PCR has happened and iris flow IOL has been implanted because of the very less capsular support. Now the surgeon is checking for the vitreous presence in the anterior chamber, and after staining with the triamcinolone, you can see there is a vitreous strand coming through the pupil into the anterior chamber and floating into the anterior chamber. So this will definitely require, removal and using automated anterior vitrectomy. So this vitreous strand was cut using automated cutter in a cut IA mode. So first it is cut from the residual vitreous and then it is aspirated. This is another case where it is a case of traumatic anteriorly subluxated nucleus where SFIL has been planted. After removal of the vitreous in toto, anterior vitrectomy from the limbal approach is done. So you have to remember that the cutter should facing towards you, or at least in the sideways when you are moving in the anterior chamber slowly. This is little fast forwarded video, but you have to be very slow with the maneuvers. It is important to change hands to approach the subincisional portion of the first side port, which can be missed if you don't change your hands. And slowly move the vitrectomy cutter along the pupillary border. Don't go under the iris in a blind manner. So just like any, just like the phaco incidence, just like the PCR during phaco, before removing irrigation source, you need to inject OVD in such cases also. So at the end, after the surgery, after the IOL implantation, it is important to do sweeping movement to check for the vitreous. You can use triamcinolone also to stain the vitreous, just like in the previous case. Here I am using pilocarpine to constrict the pupil, and there were a few vitreous stain which can be taken care by automated anterior vitrectomy. Always make sure that the wounds are not leaky, and the patient did fine with the stable IOL, round pupil, and no vitreous in the anterior chamber. This is another case which is already operated for cataract surgery and has been sent for automated anterior vitrectomy as PCR was missed, and PCR was missed in this case, I'll be continuing for the second part of presentation also. So pardon me for that for another 3 minutes. So automated anterior vitrectomy was done, and following which there is you can see there is a pupillary picking. So a sweeping movement was done to bring that inside. And after insertion of pilocarpine, you can see multiple picking on and the vitreous strands in the anterior chamber, which were cut using automated vitrectomy. And at the end of the procedure, the pupil was round with absent vitreous in the anterior chamber. It is important to close your wounds in a case of PCR. Never leave any leaky wounds, because leaky wounds are the cause for devastating complications like endophthalmitis in a case of PCR. In case of nucleus drop, never do fishing and refer the case to your VR colleague. Moving to the second part of presentation about IOL in sulcus. So whenever there is an inadequate capsular support, there are various methods for visual rehabilitation in such cases. For sulcus implantation, there are few prerequisites like good anterior capsular axis and good capsular support all around. Preferred IOL is 3-piece IOL. A good anterior vitrectomy is mandatory, and if you have a good capsular axis, you can go for haptic capture for the better stability of the IOL. For foldable 3-piece IOL implantation, the loading is also a little different. This is the Sensar 3-piece IOL with a butterfly cartridge. I have no financial interest. So the leading haptic is pushed into the cartridge and the trailing haptic is kept outside. Following which the IOL is loaded. It is important to avoid wound-assisted delivery and go enlarge your incision and go in the anterior chamber and do a slow release of the IOL. I am using a screw injector here. You can use push also according to your comfort. Make sure the leading haptic loop is on the left side, and gently push it under the iris plane. Keep your injector in the horizontal plane as far as possible, and keep the trailing haptic outside the main wound, and then gently dilate under the iris into the ciliary sulcus. In this case, I had a good anterior capsular axis, and the optic capture was also done, where optic is pushed under the capsular axis margin, and the haptics are in the ciliary sulcus. The residual cortex can be removed using Simcoe cannula. This is another case of the sulcus implantation where large PCR was there in the case of SICS. So first, after enlarging the incision, the surgeon is checking for the ciliary sulcus, and a single multi-piece non-foldable PMMA IOL is inserted gently into the ciliary sulcus, and the second haptic is also dialed in a horizontal manner to tuck the second haptic under the iris. This is another case where the foldable single-piece IOL was implanted into the ciliary sulcus, which got subluxated. So the IOL explantation with the secondary three-piece IOL implantation was planned. So IOL was folded into the anterior chamber using iris spatula and McPherson forceps, which is my preferred method of IOL explantation. And IOL, you can see the IOL is explanted in toto. Following which the three-piece foldable IOL is being inserted. In such small pupil, you can use pupil expansion devices if you feel the need of it. I'm using my cartridge to elevate the margin of the iris at the pupillary border so that my haptic can be directed toward the ciliary sulcus. The trailing haptic was kept outside and then gently dialed into the ciliary sulcus. And at the end of the procedure, patient had a round pupil without any vitreous in the anterior chamber. And post-operatively, patient is fine. So to conclude, in the case of PCR, never panic, assess the situation, call for help of the senior if needed. You as an anterior segment surgeon, you need to understand the basics about anterior vitrectomy. And before planning sulcus implantation of the IOL, always look for capsular support all around. Keep learning, keep pushing your limits. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Nikunj. May I please invite Dr. Priyam to take over?
Good morning. This is again Indranil. Sorry for the technical delay that I had because my system wasn't working. Thank you, Nikunj, for that wonderful talk. Nikunj is a cornea and refractive surgeon at SRJ Netralaya, Indore, a good friend and an ex-consultant at Sitapur Eye Hospital. The next we will be moving on to a talk by Dr. Devakant Mishra, who is a vitreoretinal consultant and an ROP specialist at IQ Super Speciality Eye Hospital, Lucknow and Kanpur. He is also the General Secretary of the Young Ophthalmic Society of India, and he would be talking over sutured SFILs. After Devakant, we would be going over for Dr. Anand Pasari's talk.
Dr. Pasari, if you'll allow me, I can just share my screen.
Screen share.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay. So at the outset, thank you, Dr. Indranil, for inviting me to this wonderful course. It's a very well-structured course, and I'm really happy and honored to be part of this. So I'll be talking about sutured scleral fixation of IOL. Some may find it a bit old-fashioned, but let us at least talk about this. So no financial disclosures. I'll be talking about some lenses and all, but no financial disclosures there. So a little bit into the history before we talk about this. So Malbran and colleagues had first published a description of sutured SFIL in the 1980s. Which was then Lewis popularized the concept of ab externo suture passes and the uses of scleral flaps, which are very important in this technique. Indications over and above the other techniques that we'll be talking about today, I couldn't really think about a specific indication where a sutured SFIL might be required. If the other panelists have any suggestion, they can come up with it. But my only reason for doing this very often is that I was trained in this technique and I feel really confident doing it. And apart from that, I have a follow-up of around 4 or 5 years, and I feel of my patients and all of them are doing pretty good. So I continue doing this technique. So let us see what all is required before we proceed with the actual technique. Of course, the number one is the lens. You cannot put your usual lens in that. So this is the one which I use more often, which is by the Aurolab. Which has an optic diameter of around 6.5 mm and overall diameter of 13 mm. It's a PMMA lens, and fairly good range is available in this lens. The other ones that are available in the market are the Alcon lens, which is CZ70BD, and the Acreos AO60 lens by Bausch & Lomb. I haven't had the opportunity to use them yet. The suture material, any 10090 Prolene suture with straight needle is preferable. I prefer the 9-0 over the 10-0 Prolene because of the strength this offers, and the maneuverability of the sutures is a bit easier with this. People have started using the Gore-Tex as well, but still I haven't utilized them in my surgery. Coming to the surgical technique, apologies for the bad quality. It's an old video, so the quality isn't that good. So this is a case of a 40-year-old one-eyed male patient who had come to us with aphakia and ERM. The retina was on. He had been operated for done vitrectomy elsewhere along with a sterile buckle, and the silicone oil removal had already been done elsewhere. So, but the patient was aphakic, and there was a pretty strong ERM that we could find. So we planned ERM removal along with SFIL, and there was a lot of residual oil in it. So we had planned to clean that up as well. So the number one thing is the peritomy that we need. So we need one for our scleral tunnel, and a good cauterization is required. In this case, it was a challenging case because a lot of fibrosis were there because of the previous buckling surgery. So 2 pockets.
Presentation urgent.
2 pockets were made at 180 degree apart, 2 mm from the limbus, and then 25 gauge 3 ports were made, and we proceeded with our ERM removal. Then we did several fluid air exchanges we did to remove the residual oil and the emulsified oil droplets that we could see in the posterior segment. Now coming to the actual procedure, in these procedures, I usually prefer to remove the bag. Number one reason is that it gives you a circular pupil, and secondly, it gives us, while maneuvering the IOL inside the lane, it becomes easier with that. Now we fashion the scleral pockets on each side. So you can use a flap as well. I'm more comfortable making a pocket, and it's very important to make a nice scleral tunnel in these cases. Otherwise, either you have to suture it, or then you can land up with a lot of hypotony in these cases. So a good tunnel is mandatory. Now we use 9-0 Prolene. Then for docking, we use a 30 gauge needle, a bent 30 gauge needle. And with the help of that, the Prolene suture is brought out on the other side. Now, a straight forceps helps us a lot in getting this thing out. So good needles, good instruments are really important if you want to finish the surgery fast. Otherwise, a lot of struggling would be required. So then we need to grab the sutures. I usually use my ILM forceps to do that. Any forceps can be utilized. The sutures are carefully brought out. These sutures are pretty thin and they can break easily, so you have to be careful while doing it. And it is cut in between. Now, as we had seen in the IOL, there are 2 eyelets on the haptic on each side. So the sutures are tight. The sutures from both the ends are tight. Now, while doing this maneuver, it might be difficult to manage the IOL. So you can request your assistant to hold the IOL or use a drop of viscoelastic to stabilize the IOL while you are tying it. And it is really important to snugly tie the suture, because otherwise there could be wobbling of the IOL can be seen post-operatively. Similarly, it is done on the other side, and then the remaining end of the sutures are cut to the optimum size. If the size is more or less, it can lead to hassles. Now, this is also a very important step where you so-called implant the IOL. Managing the suture and it usually gets entangled with the haptic there. So you have to keep advancing the suture on the one side and implanting the IOL. So now the IOL is well centered. and we'll go ahead with tying our sutures on each end. Now this should also be done very carefully, because again, if loose sutures are here, it will later lead to breakage, or again, wobbling of the IOL can be seen in these cases. So it should be done well. So it is done on each side, and another important step is putting the burying the knots and the remaining end of the suit.
Why you're unstable?
And you can use a flat instrument to do that effectively, and then we close the conjunctiva. So this is the technique as such. There are the technique is a bit traumatic, you may say, compared to other techniques. There are certain other complications like the sutures. A lot of sutures are involved. They can break. There could be dislocation of the lens because of the things that I mentioned, and lens tilt. Knot erosion is another serious issue, but with the good flaps and if the knots are buried adequately, that doesn't happen. Other serious complications like suprachoroidal or vitreous hemorrhages, retinal detachments, and endophthalmitis can also occur. And as we discussed about hypotony, and with routine cases like things like ocular hypertension and cystoid macular edema can also occur. So these are my 2 cents on the topic, and probably we can take more things in the discussion. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Devakant, for that wonderful video and the talk. And it's not old-fashioned, because I too prefer to do a sutured SFIL. Only of late I have started going into sutureless IOLs, and that would be more because of the push by my colleagues, Dr. Karan and Dr. Nikunj, who have told me to kind of change over. So moving on to Dr. Anand. So our next speaker is Dr. Anand Pasari, who is a consultant for cornea and phaco-refractive services at Indriya Eye and ENT Hospital, Nagpur. And Dr. Anand will be talking to us about anterior chamber intraocular lenses and what to do when we are in such a scenario when we are facing these lenses.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Indrani, for inviting me for this instruction course. I'm glad to be over here. So after Dr. Devakant's talk about sutured SFIOLs, I'll be talking about ACIOLs. So the topic is, are they really recommended in presence of now the retrofixated iris sutured IOLs or the modern SFIOLs, and even with the evolution of new techniques like the Yamane technique, which has become pretty popular now. So yes. So the management of aphakia has options of ACIOLs, the iris fixated IOLs, scleral fixated IOLs, and just a minute. I'll be sharing the power presentation mode. Hope my slides are visible.
Yes, sir.
Slides are visible, but we are not into the presentation mode yet.
Yes.
Slideshow, full screen.
Yes. Just. Yes, sorry for that delay. Yeah. So, let's begin with the history of evolution of anterochamber IOLs. The anterochamber IOLs came into scene fairly early in the history of intraocular lenses, and it was started soon after the Dr. Ridley used the first lens, and the first anterochamber IOL was used as early as in 1952. So as the IOLs kept on evolving, the anterochamber IOLs also kept on evolving. The initial IOLs were closed loop haptic designs, and they had multiple complications like corneal endothelial decompensation, which led to pseudophakic bullous keratopathy, the uveitis, glaucoma, hyphema syndrome, and raised intraocular pressures, and also the cystoid macular edema. So these IOLs were primarily a closed loop IOL designs of antechamber, and they had poor design, they had poor quality of manufacturing and poor polishing, and they had a lot of issues as not much was known about the sizing issues, and one size fits all technique was used for these IOLs. This often led to the fibrous tissue and pigments eroding into and growth into the holes of the haptic, and which caused synechia and raised intraocular pressures, and the IOLs coming close to the corneal endothelium. Now, over a period of time, there has been a considerable evolution in the design of these IOLs, and now the current IOLs are 4-point fixation, the Kelman multiplex antechamber AC IOL design, which is currently very well made with a polished surface, and there is no hole in the haptic, and a 3 or 4-point fixation technique, 4-point fixation to the iris and the angle structures is the current design. Okay, so this newer IOL has an open loop design with flexible haptics, and there is an anterior vaulting of 0.5 millimeter. This significantly reduces the pupillary block and the iris chafing and uveitis, which is associated with these IOLs. So even these IOLs are not foolproof because they're relatively contraindicated in patients who have pre-existing corneal endothelial disease, and there is pre-existing peripheral anterosynechy. The chamber is shallow, or there is significant pre-existing iridectomy been done, or there is iris tissue loss. And in younger patients, especially if they are strictly contraindicated in pediatric eyes. So let's consider a scenario of coming across a young cataract surgeon who has just started his practice, and he's not confident enough to perform SFIOL as discussed by Dr. Divakant, or he doesn't have access to a good vitrectomy machine, or he's not confident enough. So in that scenario, if he has learned the technique of antechamber IOL implantation, that can save his day, because these IOLs are relatively easier to implant, provided we follow some thumb rules. So the antechamber IOLs primarily face problems because of the incorrect implantation technique. So these are a few scenarios, like this is a scenario of oversized antechamber IOL, in which often lead to the haptic which is coming out of the section of the implantation. Often the AC IOL, we see the many of times when we see complications with AC IOL, the IOL is often flipped, or it's put upside down, or in some cases we also see a posterior chamber IOL which is being labeled as AC IOL, but it's a posterior chamber IOL which is implanted in the anterior chamber, which is not an actual place to be implanted. So it's important that a proper procedure for the anterior chamber IOL being placed. So aim is to implant the anterior chamber IOL which is well centered, properly sized, properly powered, and properly oriented, so that the haptic rests in the scleral spur. There is no iris tuck. The haptics are away from the iridectomies, and there is no vitreous in the anterior chamber or the bone. So coming to sizing, the proper sizing is important. It has to be oversized by one millimeter than white to white limbal diameter. However, we can't actually assess the appropriate size unless we implant it. Okay, so the sizing is a secondary concern, but it has to be 1 millimeter more in size as compared to white to white. And the most important is the correct orientation of implantation of the IOL. So this the picture on the left hand side is the current orientation, such that the trailing haptic bottom half has a reversed Z while implanting, and the knee of the trailing haptic is on the right hand side. Okay, so there has to be a reversed Z while implanting the IOL. So here we see this is the flipped IOL, or this is not the correct orientation on the right hand side, as we see. The AC IOL has a vaulting as well. So the AC IOLs are vaulted anteriorly. They are around 0.5 millimeter, and ensuring correct orientation ensures the correct vaulting, so which avoids the complications associated with like pupillary block, chronic uveitis, cystoid macular edema, and corneal decompensation. So here we see the ACIOL in the correct orientation. The side view of the Kelman's multiplex anterochamber IOL. The top view is the correct orientation, so that the ACIOL has a vault anteriorly, and the lower one is the orientation in a flipped IOL. Okay, and this causes the complications associated with like raised IOPs, synechies, and all other problems.
Doctor,
So I'm summing up.
Please request you to sum up.
Yes.
Yes.
So that so as I discussed, it is important to have proper technique and a review of these, comparing these two techniques of anterior chamber IOL implantation and the posterior chamber posterior scleral fixated IOL shows that these IOLs are safe and there was no significant differences in the complications when long-term follow-up. And thus, in conclusion, the present-day anterior chamber IOL works well when implanted currently, and it compares well as compared to the scleral fixated IOLs. Though the scleral fixated IOLs may fare more better in long term, but it can save a day on a bad day for a young surgeon who has not learned the technique of scleral fixation of the IOL. So it's a good technique to have in one's current surgical armamentarium. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anand, for that wonderful insight on ACIOLs. And definitely it is a lifesaver in an emergency situation. So moving on, so the next speaker is Dr. Karan Bhatia, who is the Joint Secretary of Young Ophthalmic Society of India. Karan is also Assistant Professor and Consultant Cornea and Phaco-Refractive Services here at Sitapur Eye Hospital, and he would be talking to us about the tips and tricks when you're handling retrofixated IOLs.
Thank you, Indranil. I'll share my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes, doctor, you're
Yeah.
visible, and the screen is also visible, loud and
So
clear.
I am somebody who who doesn't like ACIOLs a lot, and a lot of cornea surgeons, including Anand, who just spoken on the topic, would feel the same because a lot of times this does result in decompensation, and it's not an easy chance. It's not easy task to explant these ACIOLs. Evidently, you have to most of the times cut the haptic, and then take them out. So what a situation that you don't want is something like this. You need as a backup option, particularly when you remove the whole bag or you cannot implant an IOL in the sulcus. So when there's a large PCR and aphakia, so what you should do is that you should not panic in this sort of a situation, and you should calm down, think, take for a couple of seconds, relax, and then take a decision. So what comes to the rescue is the claw. So I use the XL variety of lenses, and basically it has an overall length of 8 millimeters with an optic the size of 5.5 millimeters. It has a claw over here, as you can see in the picture. This is where you enclave your iris onto it. This is a PMMA based lens. So when it comes to biometry, is extremely important over here. I use the XL lenses, which has an A constant of 117.2. So if you have if you calculated your IL as with an A constant of 118.7, then you can subtract minus 1.5, or you can basically subtract it from the IL constant that you have calculated the IOL from. So when not to do it, aphakia, which could be surgical or congenital disorders like Marfan syndrome, ectopia lentis, or even traumatic dislocated or subluxated lenses. And whenever there's a large zonal dialysis, then you cannot manage it with a combination of a CTR, CTS, or in the bag or a sulcus IOL. Contraindications would be any inflamed eyes such as active uveitis, rubiosis, iritis, excessive iris shafting, or iridectomies, any angle abnormalities like PAS, and any posterior segment pathologies like a CME or a CNVM, etc. A relative indication and a contraindication could be pseudo-exfoliation, where these irises behave very abnormally, and therefore enclavation can be de-enclavation chances can be there in such eyes. So why an iris claw IOL? Because it is good to prevent primary aphakia, and you don't need any second or multiple surgeries. it avoids delayed visual recovery and also avoids the awkward situation with the patient. So it's a very good option, particularly as a backup lens. So prerequisites is that you need a physiological pupil and you need an ample amount of undamaged iris tissue, particularly at the ends where you will be enclaving the haptics of this IOL. It is mandatory to do a good automated anterior vitrectomy, even if the vitreous face is not disturbed, because it basically then what happens is this vitreous can come later on also after enclavation of the IOL. So what instruments that you require is the IOL itself. You need some special iris claw forceps. These are the two designs that are available, and a Sinskey hook, or sometimes some people use a hydro cannula or visco cannula for the same as well. People can use a McPherson's forceps instead of these iris claw forceps, but it's a little bit more technically challenging than this. So let's take a look at the surgical video. This is a video where it requires a scleral tunnel to be made. And first thing you need to do is you need to check out that these haptics, the space is there in between them, or the gap is there or not. With a dial, it is put inside the anterior chamber to the correct orientation that you want. The iris claw forceps is grasped, and this I'm using a hydro cannula over here, and the enclavation is done. Remember, and the similarly same thing, you take this and you below the other side of the iris and enclave it. A very important point is a full thickness enclavation. If you don't do that, it is not going to give you the good results. Vitrectomy can be done with a vitrectomy probe, preferably, or with a. Let's take a look at another video, or you can also use. You do it manually also. So once this is another video where after creating of a scleral tunnel, you do need two side ports 180 degrees apart. AC maintainer can be used. Pilocarpine is actually indicated because you want the pupil to become more physiological. However, the smaller the pupil, it will make it a little bit more difficult to put it behind, but the enclavation would be at the mid iris plane, which is actually what is required in such scenarios. I'll move forward to the enclavation part. So you can go like this. Over here, I'm using a McPherson's forceps, and this enclavation is done on one side. And this enclavation, you can see it nicely once you zoom in a little bit more. And it can be done on the other side as well, followed by you do a iridectomy. Iridectomies are must to prevent the pupillary block. So tips are: enclavation should be done at the mid-iris plane. Look and test for the enclavation and stability of the IOL. If it's partially thickness, you need to go in and enclave it full thickness. You have to always suture the scleral tunnel because it is a vitrectomized eye. Peripheral iridectomy is must, and vitrectomy is also very important, or anterior vitrectomy, even if the vitreous face is not disturbed. So this is another example of a post-DSEC iris claw IOL. You can see some people may complain it will not give you a good midriasis, but yes, midriasis is possible if you very good in enclavation, good midriasis, particularly if you enclave at the mid-iris plane. So SFIL, as my colleagues have told, that sutured, they can have degradation by the sutures. Sutureless is a technically bit difficult, not for every anterior segment surgeon, but we have come out with a technique which is easier for the anterior segment surgeons, which Andrini will be showing, which is called the mixed technique. Certain studies have shown higher complication rates and need for resurgery, and due to this, basically because of suture breakage in SFILs, fewer studies have shown us they are associated with intraoperative and postoperative complications. The risk of RD is 4 to 6%. Other complications like ciliary body hemorrhage, CME, and all of these things have been reported. Although latest techniques are there, promising results, it does have a steeper learning curve than iris claw IOLs. Advantages of the iris claw IOL are that it's easy, fast, cheaper, minimum skill required, it is easily reproducible, and you do not need a retina backup in such cases. Questions what you would ask is whether pigment dispersion, any CME, what is the safety profile, and pseudophacodonosis. Pigment dispersion syndrome in iris claw IOLs is rare and a result of the intraoperative manipulation of the iris rather than the iris claw IOL itself. De-enclavation of one haptic has been seen in only 1% of the cases, and this is because you have not enclaved full thickness. Persistent uveitis, no cases have been reported. Ovalization of the pupil is seen in 10 to 15% cases. It is the most common complication that you see. However, it does not impact the visual outcome of the patient. Pupillary block rarely reported. However, PI is recommended. Raised IOP post-operatively is due to the retained OVD, and it is medically manageable. RD is reported as 0.3%. CME is not been reported in literature, and pseudophacodonosis doesn't occur when it is enclaved in the mid-iris plane. So to conclude, iris claw IOLs is a safe and a faster backup to manage aphakia. It is technically easier. It is as easy as seeing one. This is what my mentor, Dr. Aniket Shastri, told me, and I did this. In fact, I saw one, I did the next, and I trained the next. So this was 3 surgeries in one day. So automated anterior vitrectomy in PI are must and requires minimum instrumentation. It's easier than you think. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karan. So retro iris claws are another option that one has when dealing with aphakia. So moving on, I will now be presenting my presentation. So I'll be talking about sutureless SFILs. I have nil financial interests. So causes of aphakia, well, this has been already discussed, by Karan in detail, where the most common is the surgical aphakia, maybe followed by trauma and then congenital disorders. So today we are mostly focusing upon surgical aphakias, and we don't want to leave a patient like this. Complications of aphakia, optical disorders, ring scotomas, aberrations, loss of protection from UV light, CME, retinal detachment, and in pediatric population, the risk of amblyopia increases. So the treatment options, as has already been discussed by the previous speakers. So I'll be now talking about the sutureless scleral fixated intraocular lenses. So sutureless techniques, the glued IOL, which has already been discussed in multiple meetings, as popularized by Dr. Amar Agarwal, the Yamane's technique, our invention, the modified Yamane's technique or the mixed technique, and the latest to be added to this group is the CMT Flex Swiss Fold SFIL by Appaswamy Associates. So this is a quick recap of the glued SFIL that we already have been doing and have been seeing multiple videos of the same, where after a comprehensive anterior vitrectomy, three-piece lens is being introduced with the aid of an AC maintainer. As you can see in the inferior part, the microforceps are grasping the leading haptic, which will then be brought out from the scleral tunnel that has been created, followed by the trailing haptic, which is always a challenge in these glued IOLs because it might break off, might fold, causing a deformity. So you have to gently flex the trailing haptic inside and then pull with the microforceps. The centration is checked for, following which after this the glue is applied, and then the IOL haptic is tucked into the pre-prepared scleral grooves. Might happen while you're doing that, the lens might get a bit decentered, so you have to again recheck the centration and then finalize your IOL. This is the next one, the Yamane's technique, as was also mentioned by Anand and Dr. Anand and Dr. Karan, where here the ports are introduced transconjunctivally, where you make a kind of a scleral tunnel and the needle is introduced, a 26 gauge needle, the haptic is fed in, and then the trailing haptic is in a similar way fed into the needle, and then the haptics are exteriorized. As you can see here, the pars plana infusion has been used. So while you are exteriorizing this haptic, the microforceps are holding the leading haptic so that it doesn't go back into the vitreous cavity. A flange is created with the bipolar cautery, which kind of holds the IOL in its place, and then it is tucked into the conjunctiva. So this is what we would like to talk about in a little more detail, the modified Yamane's technique, which we published recently this year. It's called the where we have put both the Yamane's and XNIT combination, which was popularized by Dr. Prabhu Bhaskaran, the XNIT component. So what is different from the previous two videos that we showed was, as we are following the Yamane's technique, where we are keeping 2 mm from the limbus, the horizontal distance, and then the vertical 2 mm, the Yamane's technique requires all the manipulations to happen inside the eye or within the anterior vitreous cavity. Whereas in this technique, which we also utilize the XNIT technique, where we exteriorize the needle and then feed in the IOL inside. And the following principles are the same as what has been described in the previous procedure. So this is a video to show the same, where it's an aphakic eye, where a comprehensive vitrectomy, anterior vitrectomy is being done. the vitreous is being swept off from the iris to check for any residual vitreous, and which has been subsequently removed. As described in the animation, 2 mm from the limbus and then a vertical 2 mm distance. So this shall be our route for introducing the needles. So the other advantage of using this technique is most of the haptic is still intrascleral and very minimal component is exteriorized to be then buried into the conjunctiva. So the AC maintainer is placed in the inferior part of the AC. A PVC knob is put into the needle, and now the needle is being angled and introduced into the anterior vitreous cavity and then brought out via the SICS tunnel. So another advantage of these are you can use the rigid 3-piece IOLs, which are again cheaper compared to the foldable IOLs. So the needle is being brought out along with the haptic, and then the check or the PVC knob has been put so that this leading haptic will not slip while we are maneuvering the trailing haptic, which is a very known complication. So now the trailing haptic is being fed into the needle and is being now brought out. So we are checking for the centration. Once the centration is confirmed, we trim the haptics, and then with the heat ball cautery, we create the flange. Care has to be taken that we don't need to overdo the flange. We don't need to make big flanges. So now the stop is removed, and then again it's trimmed and the flange created. And we have a well-centered SFIL, and the case can be closed. This is the new thing that has been introduced by Dr. M. Nivian and Appasamy Associates, where they have introduced a foldable hydrophilic scleral fixated IOL, where here again with the help of forceps, a microforceps 23 gauge, the IOL you see is being injected by the phaco route. So the T haptic is grasped and is being brought out now by the scleral tunnel that was created. Keeping care that the external haptic is still there. This is how the SFIL is getting folded. And just like one would do in a foldable IOL, the leading haptic is slowly injected forward with the trailing haptic which is still remaining outside the eye. So you hold the shoulder of the IOL, and now with the on the opposite side, you introduce a 23 gauge microforceps with the handshake technique. Pull the other or the trailing haptic gently, because these lenses are a little delicate. If the force is a little too much, you might have an optic haptic divorce. So aphakia can be conquered, as we have till now seen multiple options that one has by even by the anterior segment surgeons or the posterior segment surgeons. The importance of infusion to maintain the globe pressure. One has to be careful if one is using an AC maintainer, as it pushes the iris diaphragm posteriorly. So when you are introducing the needle, one may cause iris trauma. So one needs to be careful if you're using an AC maintainer compared to a pars plana infusion where the iris diaphragm is pushed towards the cornea. The IOL placement is always desirable, be it an AC IOL or a retro iris claw or a sutured or a non-sutured SFIL. And the best technique is a combined decision between the condition of the eye of the patient and the surgeon. These are my acknowledgements. Thank you. So final, I would like to be introducing the most senior faculty in our group, Dr. Varshini Shankar. Ma'am is a senior faculty in Shroff Eye Center, New Delhi, and she is a consultant for pediatric ophthalmology, strabismus, and neuro-ophthalmology. Her special interests are disorders of convergence and accommodation, complex strabismus, and unexplained loss of vision. So ma'am will be touching over the topic of pediatric aphakia and visual rehabilitation.
Thank you so much, Indraneel. And thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this session. And I really realized that my gray hair has suddenly made me more senior. It was wonderful listening to all the talks by you guys, but I think mine is going to take a totally different turn. So my topic today is after the surgery, visual rehabilitation of pediatric aphakia. Now, the first thing I want to stress in this is, unlike all of your talks, pediatric aphakia is usually a planned aphakia. So for whatever reason, we are deciding not to implant an IOL because the child is too young or the eye is too small in order to support a IOL. So putting in an IOL may lead to more complications than leaving the child aphakic. So our concern is rehabilitating the child visually and not the safest way to introduce an IOL into the eye. So managing children with congenital cataract is a complex, long-term process. It requires considerable input from parents who are responsible for the occlusion and optical correction, long-term follow-up, as well as a high healthcare expenditure. So first we'll be talking about the infant aphakia treatment study, which gives us the best long-term results in children who have been left aphakic. So this was a multi-centric randomized control trial comparing children who were left aphakic and corrected with contact lenses compared with those in whom an intraocular lens was implanted at less than 7 months of age. The important thing to note in this is that final visual acuity was poor in both groups, whether an IOL was implanted primarily or the child was left aphakic and rehabilitated with contact lenses, with 50% of the eyes having a visual acuity less than 20/200. In addition, 72% of the infants who had a primary IOL implanted needed additional intraocular surgery for various complications. Therefore, the IATS recommended that IOL should not be primarily implanted in infants less than 6 months of age. What this basically means is that we have a large number of children who are going to have primary aphakia and need to be visually rehabilitated in other ways. First, I would like to stress that the most important thing is to plan regular evaluations under anesthesia for these children to look for secondary complications, especially for refraction, prescribing the correct glasses or contact lenses, measuring the intraocular pressure, measuring the axial length, looking at the disc and retina and correcting those before they lead to issues. It needs to be remembered that glaucoma was seen in the children left aphakic in about 35%. They either had glaucoma or were suspected or were glaucoma suspects. And for these, they need to be monitored regularly. Coming to refractive correction, which would obviously be the first step in rehabilitating these young children. This can be done with glasses, with contact lenses, and with secondary intraocular lenses. Coming to the glasses, which is obviously the first preference in younger children, it provides satisfactory correction for bilateral aphakia. The material which we prefer is CR39 or polycarbonate. We need to remember that unlike adult aphakics, we can't get a subjective refraction. So we need to give near dominant glasses in infants who are less than 3 years of age with a near addition so that their world, which is basically about 1 to 2 feet, they can see clearly. So an addition in addition to the actual manifest refraction. We need to remember that glasses are not suitable for monocular aphakia because of the 30% magnification which they cause. Contact lenses would be ideal for post-operative unilateral and some cases of very cooperative bilateral aphakia because they reduce the issues of anisoconia and magnification. This photograph just illustrates that parents are extremely apprehensive about using contact lenses in a baby, but these are extended wear contact lenses and the child is usually extremely comfortable with them after a few minutes. In the infant aphakia treatment study, the type of contact lenses which we used were silicone elastomer lenses in most of the children. Some of those who did not tolerate them used rigid gas permeable lenses. They can be shifted to the normal silicone hydrogel lenses, which are available in lower powers as the child grows older. And this buys us time before planning a secondary IOL. In fact, in some cases, if the PC support is inadequate, the child can continue with contact lenses until some form of secondary IOL like a scleral fixated IOL can be planned for them. In our scenario, of course, all this talk about contact lenses sometimes becomes really theoretical because of non-compliance, difficulty in parents understanding insertion and removal. They're expensive, they're easily lost, and many patients may have suboptimal living standards and poor ocular hygiene. So therefore, we do need to look at a secondary intraocular lenses. Advantages are, of course, constant high quality visual input immediately after the surgery. The disadvantages are that if we do the intraocular lens at say 2 years of age, the myopic shift still tends to happen and is unpredictable. And the previous complications which we mentioned regarding glaucoma and so on are still present if you introduce an IOL, especially into a small eye. So coming to the type of secondary intraocular lenses, we've already heard a lot from adult speakers, but in pediatric cases, there are some specific considerations. The most important being was an adequate capsular rim left in the first surgery. And as I said, unlike in an adult aphakia, a pediatric aphakia is generally a planned aphakia. So we do plan on leaving an adequate anterior and posterior capsular rim, which provides support for the planned secondary IOL. So if an adequate capsular rim is present, we need to see if the posterior capsular rim is also adequate and whether the anterior capsule and posterior capsule can be separated and an in-the-bag IOL implanted at a later stage. If the posterior rim is not adequate, then a ciliary sulcus fixation needs to be planned. If a rim is inadequate, then a scleral fixated IOL is done, which is usually done at a later age. One tip is that in bilateral aphakia, we prefer to operate on the eye with a doubtful capsular support first, because if a sulcus IOL is not present, then we don't operate the other eye and just continue with contact lenses as before. The timing of the surgery is after 2 years of age. Scleral fixated IOLs, in fact, because unlike in adults, we are not really trying the sutureless IOLs in children, because we are more wary about the growth and the suture giving through and the IOL being unstable. So SF IOLs are usually done at a later age when the eye growth is complete. In the bag fixation, if it's being planned, then a single piece IOL can be planned, but usually we do a ciliary sulcus fixation for which a 3-piece foldable IOL is placed. Coming to strabismus, approximately 50% of all children with cataracts eventually develop strabismus. Early onset unilateral cataracts, which are the ones we are talking, which we may be leaving aphakic at less than 1 year of age, they have the highest risk of strabismus. Strabismus usually happens because of amblyopia and poor vision. So surgery is planned after appropriate amblyopia therapy and once the strabismus angles are stable. And obviously children with better vision and binocularity have a better stability of ocular alignment. So coming to amblyopia therapy, which is basically the main point of this talk. So stimulus deprivation amblyopia develops due to an obstruction preventing clear formation of an image on the retina. This constitutes less than 3% of all amblyopia. There are no randomized control trials up till now based on treatment of stimulus deprivation amblyopia. They are specifically excluded in most of the recent trials, especially the PIDIG studies, because it's considered more severe, more resistant to treatment. Treatment is also compounded by a lot of other factors, including coexisting pathologies like the eye may be smaller, there may be optic nerve hypoplasia. You may have rubella retinopathy, all of which may also affect the vision. The infants are very young and there's difficulty in quantifying vision loss, all of which may lead to poor compliance with the amblyopia therapy. The patching regimen, the gold standard is total occlusion to form and light. So therefore with an adhesive occlusive patch, In the infant aphakia treatment study, the patching was done at the rate of 1 hour per day per month of age till 8 months of age, which means a 6-month-old child who's left aphakic will have a refractive correction and be patched for 6 hours a day. In older children, this was recommended for 50% of the waking hours. So the moderate amblyopia, severe amblyopia guidelines, which we are more familiar with, are from the amblyopia treatment study, which did not include children with stimulus deprivation amblyopia. However, in older children with moderate or severe amblyopia, they can have 2 to 6 hours of patching with near work. Children who are extremely non-compliant with patching can also be penalized with atropine in the sound eye, which has shown good improvement in children, but not in stimulus deprivation amblyopia. So coming to the newer types of therapy which are available for treatment of amblyopia, where there's a lot of buzz around these therapies. Coming to perceptual therapy, coming to dichoptic therapy, and virtual reality-based therapies. So perceptual therapy is based on the principle that practice makes perfect. The first picture which I'm showing are Gabor patches, which are commonly used in these therapies. And basically, they're based on the principle that you need to do various visual activities using these patches, orientation of the patches, brightness of the patches, the number, locate them. And over a period of time, both the visual acuity and stereopsis tends to improve. Dichoptic therapy is where a different stimuli is provided to each eye. In this particular photograph, we can see a patient with red-blue glasses, and who is
Doctor,
being
with all
provided.
due respect, the time is up. Could you please sum
Yes,
up?
this is the last slide.
Thank you, doctor.
Yes. So my last slide is.
Finish. We actually have half an hour, so I can let ma'am finish.
So this is just a virtual reality video, which is having a lot of buzz because it's supposed to be much easier and much more interesting for patients to do. So they wear these virtual reality headsets. They are provided a different stimulus to each eye. So if you see in this picture, it's brighter in one eye and duller in the other eye. So duller for the good eye, brighter for the weaker eye. And the brain has to integrate the two images in order to see a 3D image. So these newer therapies are showing a lot of promise, but till now the gold standard obviously remains patching. And coming to the last slide where we go low tech again. So we need to remember that again, a lot of these children are operated at a later age. They have other disabilities, including physical disabilities. You can see in the first photograph, the child is wearing a leg brace. So many of them have cerebral palsy, developmental delay. So rehabilitation is not just vision, but it involves combined and coordinated use of medical, social, educational, and vocational measures for training the individual to the highest possible level of functional ability. And that is the end of my talk. Thank you so much. And thank you again, Dr. Indraneel, for inviting me to be a part of this session.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you all the speakers, Dr. Anand, Dr. Nikunj, Dr. Karan, Dr. Devakant, who had to leave because he has another talk in AIOS only right now. Purnesh, since we have some time, can we have some questions? Can we take questions?
Yes, sir. Let's go ahead with questions.
So if there's is there any questions from the audience for any of the speakers? So, well, okay, because I had been listening to all the speakers, so I had a couple of queries for almost everyone. So I would begin with ma'am only, Dr. Varshini ma'am. Ma'am, the few questions that I had for you was, you already told the age limit at what the IOLs should be implanted, but between the primary and the secondary surgery or the secondary IOL implant, what should be the time limit or the time duration?
So see, in the primary surgery, we are basically leaving the child aphakic because the eye is too small. So we do check whether if the corneal diameter, horizontal corneal diameter is less than 10 millimeters or the AC is shallow, or we are thinking of any other posterior segment issues which may be present. For example, if you're thinking the child may have a rubella retinopathy, we do a fundus evaluation on table before implanting an IOL if we are thinking about it. But if any of these issues are present, then you prefer to leave the child aphakic. So this, if you're leaving a child aphakic, this may be in the first 2 years of age. If you're leaving a child bilaterally aphakic, that is usually because of microophthalmos, because you don't want to stuff a normal sized IOL into a small eye. That is definitely a recipe for disaster. You are going to develop a secondary glaucoma, right? But if you have left a child aphakic, say a 7-month-old with bilateral cataract with a normal sized eye, and you've left them bilaterally aphakic because you know you can rehabilitate them well with glasses, then you will plan an IOL after 2 years of age, depending on how whether everything else is normal, which is why the EUAs are important. So if the intraocular pressure is normal, the child is developing good vision, the retina is good, then you can go ahead with implanting an IOL at 2 years of age. The scleral fixated IOLs I specifically mentioned because the eye is still growing till about 8 years of age. And the incidence of IOLs, SF-IOLs decentering and sutures degrading and breaking is higher in children. So we are a little more cautious with those patients, especially if they are well rehabilitated with contact lenses. If contact lenses are not working for them and we are trying to correct aphakia with unilateral glasses and patching, then you would do an earlier surgery automatically. So everything is guided by vision, basically.
Is just a follow up to the first one. What would be your tips on breaking the adhesion between the remnant capsular rim and the iris when implanting a secondary IOL?
So basically, first you would do a limited anterior vitrectomy to make sure no vitreous strands are coming in, if that is required. Then you would put in a very fine iris spatula between the two leaflets. So normally there is some amount of lenticular cells which are there, which maintain the space between the anterior capsule and the posterior capsule. So if they are not firmly adherent, if you just put in a lens spatula and then inject like maybe Helon or a viscoelastic in between them, that helps in cleaving the space. And only if you're able to do that 360 degrees and you have generally, since the posterior capsular opening is planned, we tend to leave only about a 5 millimeter opening in that. So which is, and the anterior capsule and posterior capsule in children, since they tend to get opacified, they tend to be quite rigid. Unlike in adults where we have like a very fine capsule, in children they tend to be very rigid and firm. So if you're able to separate it 360 degrees, then you can go ahead and implant the IOL, which is not difficult because you have a very firm 5 millimeter central opening. So you just have to make sure that your haptic travels over that into the bag.
Thank you, ma'am. The next I would like to ask Dr. Anand. Is he here? Dr. Anand Pasari? Okay, I think Dr. Anand might not be here. So Dr. Nikunj is here, and Nikunj has been also actively involved in training postgraduates in cataract surgery. So for Nikunj, I had a couple of questions. When, like in an eventful cataract where you had a PCR and now you have a remnant sulcus, do you prefer anything other than a 3-piece? Point one. That's the first question. And if you are going ahead for a non 3-piece foldable, how would your plan be to tackle the situation?
Okay, thank you, Indranil, for that question. So most of the cases where I'm training and if the trainee has a posterior capsular rupture, first and foremost, we assess that how is the capsular support. If the capsular support is good, then and if the foldable 3-piece IOL is available, then my first choice would definitely be a 3-piece IOL in sulcus with or without optic capture. And I would like to do optic capture also if possible for a better stability. Coming to your second question, I have implanted foldable IOL in the bag in cases of PCR, but you need to make sure that the PCR is not big enough to let IOL sink in the posterior segment. And for that, I would I prefer a hydrophobic IOL and never a hydrophilic because those are very soft and they can actually just squeezing go through a smaller opening even into posterior segment. And I have seen people placing hydrophilic IOLs in the sulcus, but they don't stay well. They keep moving. And I showed another case where I had to explant one hydrophilic IOL which was placed in the sulcus. As it was anyways, it actually constantly rubs the posterior surface of the iris and causes pigment dispersion continuously. So hydrophobic IOL may be, and in certain cases, because of paucity of time, I was not able to show a case where if the small PCR, which can be converted into a circular posterior capsular axis, then you have a strong capsule margin. In those cases, the IOL can be implanted in the bag as well. So these are the options.
One final question to you. In the event of PCR, would you want to put in a toric lens?
Personally, I have not put
that toric lens, and then this happened. Would you still proceed with implanting the toric?
I would personally not, but I have discussed a similar scenario with one of my colleague who has done torical implantation in the bag, even in a case of PCR. But depends on the size and location of the PCR also in that case. And in his case, the PCR was little in the periphery, and it was not in the area of the where the IOL was supposed to be oriented. But yeah, good anterior vitrectomy has to be done. There are a few surgeons. I saw one case from Dr. I.K. Ahmed. He has recently uploaded in his YouTube channel. I religiously follow him. I'm a huge fan of him. He had a PCR in a case where toric IOL was planned, and he converted into a circular posterior capsular axis after implanting the IOL, and then IOL was oriented according to the axis, and the IOL was stable postoperatively. So yes, you can put the toric IOL if it is planned preoperatively.
Can I add a point here, Nikunj? So I have also put, one of the things is that you need to have a central rent. If it's peripheral, it does create a problem. I have put in a large PCR rent, about more than 6 mm also, but the technique over here would be different. Like normally what you would do in a toric IOL is that you would put it around 30-40 degrees before the intended position with the visco, and then you would, after removal of the visco, you would rotate it. That's how you do a normal toric IOL into position in the presence of fluid. But in such a situation, you would put it directly in the anterior chamber, first the IOL, and you would just bring the haptics with the forceps or a dialer and put it in the desired position directly. And the visco removal has to be done very gently with the hydrocannula, very slowly, and then you can get away with the if you have a good rim, even if it's a large rent, you can put in toric IOL. But this is how you need to put it directly into position rather than no rotation forces applicable over here.
Okay, so the size of the rent, even if I wanted to ask Karan, Dr. Karan, that till what size of the rent you would want to put?
I have put 6 mm rent also. I have put.
Okay, 6 mm.
Yes, large rents also. See, you need to have that rim. The ALC rim, however, the size of the rexus, the same size as the rexus needs to be posteriorly also. If that rim is there, which will hold the haptic in position, then you can do it. Just you do keep no fluctuations in the chamber, and it does well. I have one patient with a good follow-up who's doing very well still date.
Right. Sure. Thank you, Nikunj and Karan, for those inputs about dealing with PCRs. So my next question would be actually for Karan himself. So being a VR person, many a times post-secondary IOLs, we'll end up with retinal detachments. And sometimes it happens that we may need to remove the IOL. Though it is easy to remove in the sulcus or in the bag IOL, a retro iris claw, as Karan showed in his videos, is very firmly enclaved into the mid-iris plane. So what would be the plan that more like a VR surgeon like me would require if I want to explant this retro-fixated iris claw?
See, when we are talking about we're talking about mainly retro-fixated iris claw lenses. So you have to cut that portion of the iris. It's not that easy to de-enclave it once it's fully enclaved. So you will have to use both your hands, a combination of forces, hold the haptic, and with a cutter or with a scissor, micro scissors, you'll have to cut that area of the iris. Otherwise, if you pull too much, you might result in iridodialysis. The enclavation is not easy. as enclavation is easy.
Thank you, Karan, for that last tip. And so before we conclude, I just had a couple of points to add where when we are using, as Nikunj already described, the anterior vitrectomy technique, when we're doing the anterior vitrectomy, it's always essential to check that your suction isn't too high. The suction should be towards the lower side, and the cut rate should always be higher, as is the principle of a vitrectomy. Close watch on the infusion so that at no stage during the vitrectomy does the eye go into hypotony, as it may have grave posterior segment complications. On that note, on behalf of all my speakers, thank you AIOS Scientific Committee for giving us the opportunity. Thank you speakers for being a part of this instruction course. If there are any questions, we'll be happy to take. Otherwise, we are done.